Okay, so board policies are separate from all other aspects of the organization. Let's see if I can make this go. Okay, he says, you can see from figure 3, which you don't have, but you can appreciate what I'll describe here in a moment. He says, you can see that the board has made policies that cover everything in the organization, but it has done so by addressing the broader levels of all issues, not all the specifics. So again, the key here is the levels of issues, not the details. The more detailed levels are for the CEO or the CGO to decide or to delegate further, subject to the requirements that the decisions made are reasonable interpretations of the board policy. Let us reiterate that the board's policies in the fourth quadrant of the circle are all the board has to say. We discussed the exception of the bylaws in his other book here. There are no additional board documents, though. Staff will have many of their own documents for internal purposes. So let's move on here. This means that the organization's budget, strategic plan, and other documents commonly embraced by the board are really management's documents. Okay, let's be clear here now. He's talking about the budget, strategic plan, and other documents commonly embraced by the board are really management's documents. So they're not supposed to be managed by the board, according to Carver, but by the management, by the CEO and his team. They are components in the manager's arsenal of means to ensure organizational compliance with board policies. So, for example, with the exception of planning governance itself, organizational planning and budgeting are done and revised as necessary by staff, subject to applicable executive limitations policies. Because we recognize that this is an unusual way for boards to control important means like budgeting and risk management, we devote further discussion to the rationale and methods of financial governance in another section of his policy guide. But here are a few examples of policies in each category at the very top level. 3 examples of end policies are shown because they differ so much from one organization to another. So here's some example of ends. XYZ trade association members will enjoy conditions favorable for business success sufficient to justify their dues. Okay, that's one set of ends. Second one, people with developmental challenges will achieve their potential at a level justifying available resources. And here's a third one. The 3-year rolling average of earnings per share will be greater than the mean of similar organizations. Okay. For executive limitations, he has this example. The CEO shall not cause or allow conditions, activities, or decisions that are imprudent, unlawful, or in violation of customary business and professional ethics. For the governance process, the board, on behalf of the Jefferson community, exists to ensure that the Jefferson Historical Society is effective, prudent, and ethical. And an example of board management delegation. The board links governance and management through a single chief executive officer titled General Manager. So although the board has the right to stop at this broad level, in fact, few would, simply because they would not be willing to leave so broad a range of decision-making to subordinate decision makers. Consequently, lower-level policies would say more about, for example, which business success, which developmentally compromised people, organizations similar in what respects, which ethical codes, how the board ensures achievement, and what it meant by links with management. At any rate, at some point, all boards will stop and leave it to others to make the remaining decisions. You will see that both the CGO and CEO are empowered to make decisions, but in separate domains. The roles of the Chief Governing Officer and the Chief Executive Officer are adjacent, and neither reports to the other. We discuss these roles and more in another guidebook. The CGO has no authority on the right side of the circle, and the CEO has none on the left. This means that, like all other board members, the CGO has no executive authority. It also means that it is never the CEO's responsibility to make governance process decisions, such as what the board's agenda should be, for this would be giving the board employee or subordinate the responsibility to see that his or her boss is responsible. A policy governance board understands that if it cannot govern itself, it can hardly govern an organization, so it takes control of its own agenda. The board's agenda is developed from the board's overall job description, which describes the results, outputs, and values added that good governance should produce. Those results constitute an output type of job description rather than a list of activities. Creating a results-based job description of this sort requires a governance theory that describes what a board is for to begin with. The board's job description, like all board decisions, is put into the form of policy, and in this case becomes part of the governance process category. The board, using policy governance, must produce 3 non-delegable outcomes: connection with owners, written governing policies, and assured organizational performance, all of which we discuss in greater detail in another book. These outputs, when produced by the board, allow it to ensure the translation of the owner needs into organizational performance. I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit. Earlier, we listed 3 steps in accountable delegation: setting expectations for performance, identifying delegatees, and inspecting evidence that expectations were met. At this point, we have discussed the first of these 3 steps in the delegation sequence, the board's manner of establishing its expectation using the ends-means principle and the principle of subsequential level of detail. In making our point, we've occasionally mentioned the assignment of those expectations. Now we will focus directly on the second of the 3 steps in the delegation sequence: assigning board expectations and the authority to meet them. Okay, I'm going to stop here and let us have some discussion for clarification and understanding. So let's discuss that now.